Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into something, well, both ancient and incredibly urgent.
Yeah, the connection between education and emancipation.
Exactly, but viewed through a rich African philosophical lens. We've got some really powerful sources here.
Sources that explore how these ideas have shaped African societies, and still do.
Right, challenging us and you to rethink what true freedom, what true knowledge actually means.
Mm-hmm.
So our mission for this deep dive, it's really to pull out the most compelling insights, get the historical context.
And explore those philosophical paths towards, a truly liberated future for Africa, defined by Africa itself.
Get ready for some serious aha moments, I think.
And what's really compelling, I find, is that we're not just sort of looking at definitions from afar.
No.
We're engaging directly with how African thinkers themselves wrestled with these concepts, often under, immense pressure.
Yeah.
It's about moving beyond just being free from something, say, colonial rule.
Right, the negative freedom idea.
To being free to define one's own identity, culture, development on authentic terms.
So this dive into the sources, it really promises to challenge maybe some of your assumptions about what knowledge is for, its power.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. Our first source, a paper by Omatoso from 2010, it jumps right in.
Yeah, highlighting that education and emancipation are concepts with a veritable cauldron of interpretations.
A real hot mix of meanings then. Complex stuff.
Definitely debated.
But before we get lost in the complexities, how are these basic ideas, these core concepts, initially understood?
Well, the paper traces education back to its Latin root, "odicere."
Adducere, okay.
Meaning to lead a person out, like Plato's analogy.
The cave analogy, yeah. Leading someone from the dark cave of ignorance.
Into the limelight of knowledge. And what's striking there right away is the implication.
That freedom, a kind of emancipation, should be the goal, the end product.
It absolutely sets the stage. And the paper notes education isn't monolithic. It's often classified, formal, non-formal, informal.
Right. And this classification becomes critical when looking at Africa.
Totally. Because traditional African education often gets sort of pigeonholed by some as just informal or non-formal in indigenous knowledge.
As Jayolo Omoyeni suggested. But not everyone agrees.
Not at all. Scholars like Rodney Olawole, they strongly challenge this. They point to clearly formal aspects.
Like initiation rites.
Yeah.
With specific things to learn.
Exactly. Structured curricula, defined outcomes. They push back hard against what they call the false belief that Africans never developed any form of knowledge, science, technology, or democracy.
Wow. I mean, that's a huge thing to deny a whole continent. It's intellectual history.
It is. And Olawole, back in 2000, argued this false belief had real consequences.
Yeah.
It led to African education being mentally bound to Western intellectual culture.
Mentally bound. That phrase really hits hard.
Mm-hmm.
It suggests a kind of ongoing intellectual colonialism.
That's a good way to put it. Where the very frameworks, the ideas, the ways of thinking are imported, and they subtly undermine or just devalue indigenous knowledge. Self-definition.
So it's not just political freedom we're talking about. It's freedom of the mind.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Which brings us to a really fundamental question for you, the listener. What really qualifies as education?
Good question.
The philosopher R.S. Peters, back in 1967, offered a pretty powerful framework. 3 criteria.
Okay, what are they?
First, the learner has to understand what's taught, not just rote memorization.
Makes sense.
Second, the teaching method has to be morally acceptable. Respect the learner's dignity.
Crucial.
And third, it must consciously aim to bring about a positive change towards some desirable goal.
So the purpose and the impact matter more than just the structure, like classroom versus community ritual.
Exactly. It's about transformation, ultimately.
Okay, that gives us a strong framework for what education should be. But following that logic, who then qualifies as an educated person, according to these different views?
Yeah, and here our sources show this, wide gap between Western and African ideas. It's really illuminating.
How so? Give us an example.
Okay, so the Western view, maybe summed up by Woodrow Wilson, it paints an educated person as someone who distinguishes good reasoning from bad, digests evidence.
Very analytical.
Right. Has a habit of Catholic observation, prefers the nonpartisan point of view, has a taste for knowledge, respects the integrity of the human mind.
Sounds like it emphasizes individual, rational, objective thought. A lot.
It absolutely does. It's a very individualistic ideal. Now, contrast that with the African view described in the sources, described as holistic, socially, and functionally oriented. Take the traditional Yoruba perspective they mention.
Okay.
An educated person there isn't just, intellectually sharp. It's someone who combines expertise in some specific economic skills with soundness of character and wisdom in judgment.
So practical skills and character.
And more. Equipped to handle family, community problems, knows folklore, health remedies, fulfills social duties, is wise, uses proverbs, self-controlled, dignified.
Wow.
And ultimately possesses excellent character.
That is a profoundly different picture. It's not just about what you know, but who you are, how you contribute to the whole.
Precisely. And the sources really stress the historical impact of this difference. When Western education arrived in Africa,
It brought its own values.
exactly, laden with individualistic ethos as against the communalistic lifestyle of Africans. Edward Blyden, way back, called this approach absurd.
Why absurd?
Because it produced caricatures of alien manners, people just mimicking foreign ways.
And Moebi Yamoda later described it as a clash of civilization.
Leading to cultural confusion and alienation of the colonized. This wasn't just academic debate. It fundamentally altered how people saw themselves, their communities. It's the critical backdrop for this quest for emancipation.
Okay, so that's the complex educational landscape. What about emancipation itself? How do the sources define that?
At its core, simply freedom from restrictions. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
The Omatoso paper even offers this potent little formula. Justice, education, plus emancipation.
Interesting. So education leads you out of ignorance.
Right. But as we're seeing, and as we'll explore more, true emancipation is way more complex than just, say, political liberation. It's a whole societal, mental shift.
Right. So the philosophical landscape in Africa then became this sort of, well, a battleground of ideas responding to all this.
Definitely. How do you respond to imposed education systems? How do you achieve real emancipation?
And this is where you said it gets really interesting. P.O. Badunrin's 1981 paper, The Question of African Philosophy.
Yes. He maps out 4 main philosophical approaches or trends that emerged in response.
And you mentioned these weren't just random ideas.
No, Badunrin makes it clear they were direct, often courageous responses to very specific historical and intellectual challenges Africans were facing. Think of them as pressures leading to reactions.
Okay, what were those pressures?
Well, first, the challenge of European mischaracterization. You had early ethnographers painting this unworthy picture of Africans primitive, irrational, illogical.
So a need to push back against stereotypes, a counter-narrative.
Exactly. Second, the rise of Black nationalism. The push for political independence was huge, but thinkers realized it needed total mental liberation, too, severing those intellectual ties to the colonizers.
Wasn't enough just to change the flag on the pole.
Precisely. Third, philosophy itself. The idea that philosophy was this sort of honorific thing, and if Africa didn't have its own recognized philosophy, it implied inferiority.
Ah, so pressure to find or create an African philosophy.
The powerful drive, yeah. And finally, just the practical reality. Scarcity of resources. Philosophy, like any discipline, had to show its relevance on a continent grappling with basic social needs. It couldn't just be abstract navel-gazing.
Okay, those are some heavy pressures.
Yeah.
So what were the 4 key responses Badunrin saw emerge from this?
The first he called ethnophilosophy. Thinkers like Temple's Senghor. It presents the collective worldviews of African peoples, their myths and folklores and folk wisdom, as philosophy.
Trying to show the richness of existing African thought systems.
Right. But Badunrin raises a crucial critique, a key lesson for us, I think. He says these works often describe thought systems brilliantly, but they hardly raise philosophical issues about the system or critically evaluate them. It's more description than rigorous philosophical analysis.
That's a really important distinction. Just documenting a belief isn't the same as doing philosophy questioning, analyzing, critiquing it.
Exactly. Then there's the second trend, philosophic sagacity.
Sagacity, wisdom.
Yeah. This trend looks for critical, independent thinkers, sages, wise individuals within society, often elders. The goal was to show that literacy is not a necessary condition for philosophical reflection.
Finding philosophy outside academia, like Marcel Griol talking with Ogo Temeli.
That's a classic example cited. Trying to unearth philosophical insights from those uninfluenced by modern Western education. Badunrin's take, though, is interesting.
What does he say?
He suggests that while these dialogues can help give birth to philosophical ideas already in them, it's often a kind of new creation or articulation sparked by the dialogue itself.
Not necessarily tapping into a pre-existing, fully formed tradition of organized critical reflections in the way Western philosophy might define it.
Precisely. It's bringing ideas to light, maybe, rather than finding a ready-made system.
Okay, trend 3.
Nationalist ideological philosophy. This is where you see political figures stepping in, Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere.
Big names. What was their goal?
They try to evolve a new and, if possible, unique political theory based on traditional African socialism and familyhood. It was explicitly about mental liberation, returning to what they saw as genuine and authentic traditional African humanism.
A powerful nation-building kind of aspiration. But I guess Baudonrin had critiques here, too.
He did. He acknowledged the worthwhile aspiration, absolutely, but he cautioned against romanticizing the African past.
How so?
He pointed out that traditional societies were generally not as complex as the modern African societies. And things like communalism, he argued, worked because of the feelings of familyhood that sustained it, often within very closed groups.
Making it maybe less suitable for large, diverse modern nations.
That was his concern. And he posed a really tough question for people to think about. A way of life which made it possible for our ancestors to be subjugated by a handful of Europeans cannot be described as totally glorious.
Oof, that's a stark point. Learn from the past, don't just idealize it.
It highlights the need for a critical lens, not just celebration. We have to examine everything, even cherished traditions, to truly move forward.
A challenging but necessary perspective, it seems. So this leads to the 4th trend.
Yes, professional philosophy. This is the camp Baudonrin himself belongs to, along with thinkers like Kwasi Wiredu, Paulin Hountondji. They take a more universalist view.
Universalist, meaning?
Meaning, they argue that philosophy, the discipline itself, should have the same meaning, the same standards of rigor everywhere. Criticism and argument are essential.
So African philosophy is?
Simply philosophy done by African philosophers. Ideally dealing with African contexts and problems, but the method, the logical rigor, the critical analysis is paramount. It's about joining the global intellectual conversation, but rooted in African realities.
Okay, so the method is universal, but the subject matter can be distinctly African. Got it.
Exactly. And connecting back to his other critiques, Baudonrin also noted a reluctance among some ethnophilosophers and sagacity researchers like Sedipo and Hallen.
A reluctance to do what?
To actually evaluate the beliefs they were documenting. They might explain why people held certain beliefs, like Yoruba ideas about destiny, perhaps arising from emotional needs.
But they didn't ask if the beliefs were true or logically consistent.
Often not, according to Baudonrin. He argued that showing a belief meets an emotional need can hardly be construed as having shown it to be rational.
Makes sense.
And he powerfully argued we shouldn't shy away from tackling genuine, perennial philosophical problems, just to make Africans seem unique or somehow immune to the laws of logic.
So the goal isn't just uniqueness for its own sake, but pursuing truth and rationality wherever they lead.
That seems to be his core message. True intellectual emancipation means being brave enough to apply universal standards of logic and critique, even to your own culture's narratives, not just those imposed from outside.
That's a really crucial insight. So where does this leave us in terms of finding actual workable solutions?
Yeah.
Beyond critiquing past approaches.
Well, this is where the paper by Badru and Omotoso really picks up the thread. They build on many of these critiques.
Okay.
They argued that those earlier traditional accounts of emancipation in Africa often fell short. They were reductionist, intellectually impoverished.
Strong words.
Because they focused too narrowly, often just on the social scientific aspects, missing the deeper philosophical foundations needed for real change.
So what do Badru and Omotoso propose instead?
They advocate for something much broader. A holistic philosophy of emancipation as positive transformation.
Holistic philosophy of emancipation as positive transformation. That sounds big, ambitious. How do they define it?
It's a really robust definition. They call it a conscientious nurturing of the capacities of the human subject, either as individuals or groups, to attain to a high level of positive transformation.
Okay, break that down. Nurturing capacities.
Meaning developing potential. And it's not just about freedom from constraints, what they call negative freedom, like escaping colonial rule. It's primarily about liberation to achieve your full potential positive freedom.
Freedom to be and do.
Exactly. And crucially, this positive transformation has to happen across the board,
Right.
politically, economically, and culturally. It's a total systems change, really.
That definitely broadens the scope way beyond just political independence. What did they see as the main failings of those earlier, narrower views of emancipation?
They pinpointed 6 major areas where previous approaches really fell short of achieving true liberation for Africa.
6. Okay, what were they?
Their inability to, 1, really inquire into a suitable African identity, often just reacting against external definitions, not defining from within. 2, emphasize moral capital, overlooking the ethical core needed for a healthy society.
Morality as infrastructure, almost.
Kind of, yeah. 3, tackle institutional inefficiency and corruption, these huge internal roadblocks. 4, effectively counter intellectual imperialism, the ongoing dominance of Western thought patterns.
Still mentally bound, in Oliwell's words.
Exactly. 5, use sound logical analysis to properly evaluate ideas and policies. And 6, crucially, look seriously at internal causes of underdevelopment instead of focusing mainly on external factors like colonialism, which avoids difficult self-reflection.
Wow. Those are some profound gaps. It sounded like a lot of foundational work just wasn't being done.
That's their argument. These failings left the Liberation Project incomplete, intellectually impoverished.
So how do Badru and Omatoso propose to address these failings? You said they used philosophy.
Yes, they outline a holistic approach structured around the 4 traditional branches of philosophy, basically saying we need these philosophical tools to build a genuinely liberated future.
Okay, let's walk through them. What's the first branch?
First up is the metaphysics of positive transformation. This deals with the fundamental nature of reality, existence, the African person. It covers ontology and cosmology.
Ontology, the study of being. What's the key question there for Africa?
The core question is, what kind of Africanity, what kind of African identity should be promoted today to empower people? They critique a simple, wholesale return to authentic traditional Africanity as impractical, maybe even problematic in a globalized world.
Can't just turn back the clock.
Right. They also critique Arabo-Islamism and Euro-Christianity for often polarizing Africans. So they lean towards something they call eclectic Africanity.
Eclectic Africanity. Sounds like mixing and matching.
But carefully, it has to be critically selective, pragmatically appropriate, and properly synthesized. You can't just grab things randomly.
Needs thought. Needs criteria.
Exactly. They give this really stark, uncomfortable example. Africans uncritically bleaching their skin to look lighter.
Yeah.
They force us to ask, what is ontologically wrong with a dark complexion that drives that kind of behavior? It demands deep critical thinking about self-worth, identity, beauty standards, not just blindly adopting external ideals. We have to ask why we value what we value.
That's a powerful, very concrete illustration of how abstract philosophy impacts real lives, real choices. What about the cosmology part of metaphysics, worldviews?
Here the question is, are all traditional worldviews still pragmatically useful, still relevant today?
Yeah.
They use communalism again. They argue that moral communalism, that spirit of fellow feeling, community solidarity is absolutely desirable and feasible. We need that.
The attitude, the value.
Yes. But political communalism, trying to run a large, modern, multi-ethnic state exactly like a small, traditional, homogenous village might not be administratively feasible or even fair.
So it requires critical analysis again. Discern what parts of tradition to keep, adapt, or maybe let go of based on today's realities, not blind adherence.
Precisely. Honor the spirit. Adapt the structure where needed.
That sounds incredibly practical, actually. Okay, second branch, the epistemology of positive transformation. This is about knowledge, right? The knowledge infrastructure. Sounds vital for breaking that intellectual imperialism.
Absolutely foundational. Their argument is that Africa's underdevelopment is partly rooted in this overdependency on Western knowledge.
At every level, ideas, funding.
Yes, ideas, funding sources, research priorities, even the methods used. To counteract this, Africa needs to build its own epistemic capital, its own intellectual wealth, its own knowledge base.
Oh, what does that involve?
Cultivating qualities often seen in, say, Western scholarship, like inquisitiveness, risk-taking, creativity, intellectual excellence, but very importantly, also rejecting intellectual corruption. Like, academics just publishing papers for promotion points, without real substance. A problem everywhere, maybe, but particularly damaging when you're trying to build from the ground up.
Yeah, empty calories don't build strength.
Exactly. They stress the need for problem-oriented research focused squarely on African realities, solving African problems, and ideally funded by indigenous sources like corporations as part of their social responsibility.
Building a self-sustaining knowledge ecosystem. For Africa, by Africa.
That's the goal, a huge shift in mindset.
Okay, that covers metaphysics and epistemology. What about human conduct? That brings us to branch 3.
The ethics of positive transformation. This tackles head-on the massive issue of unwholesome administrative leadership.
Corruption, bad governance.
Yes, and the prevalence of what they call predatory or vampire states.
And vampire states, that's vivid.
It is. States where the leaders essentially drain the nation's resources and power for their own gain, like a predator. They cite historical examples like Abacha, Mobutu, Idi Amin.
So what's the ethical solution proposed?
A constitutionally entrenched ethical framework of political utilitarianism. Basically, a system hardwired to prioritize the greatest good for the greatest number.
How would that work in practice?
Emphasizing probity and professionalism, building moral capital in politics, demanding performance-driven political leadership, holding leaders genuinely accountable for results, not just rhetoric.
A very high standard. And it's not just about the leaders, is it?
No, absolutely not. It extends to everyone, the citizenry, too. They talk about needing a moral deorientation, meaning actively turning away from materialism, from exploitative ways of interacting with each other.
And replacing it with?
A moral reorientation, re-embracing values like altruism, kindness, that fellow feeling we talked about. It's a call for a deep ethical renewal across society, top to bottom. True positive transformation isn't possible without that strong moral foundation.
Seems like a massive challenge, but you can see why it's essential if the goal is genuine transformation. Okay, finally, the 4th branch.
The logic of positive transformation. This is about applying critical thinking consistently.
How?
Continuous, constructive, critical analysis of Africa's own sociopolitical and economic institutions without always just waiting for or relying on foreign prescriptions. Take the economy, for example.
Okay.
They suggest a think tank bringing together diverse scholars, economists, political scientists, and philosophers to figure out the best economic path for Africa. Is it command, market, mixed?
Considering what factors?
Considering the underlying philosophical assumptions of each system and the reality of large populations of socially disadvantaged people. The goal isn't just growth, but growth that reduces poverty.
And importantly, not just importing models.
Exactly. They explicitly caution against uncritically swallowing models from global institutions like the IMF or World Bank. They even challenge Fukuyama's end of history idea.
The idea that liberal democracy and market capitalism won.
Yeah. They point out, look, the Soviet Union achieved substantial development through socialist collectivization. Maybe it wasn't the end point, but it shows other paths are possible. The key is critical analysis to find what works best for Africa's context, maximizing growth while minimizing poverty, not just copying.
Wow. Okay, that is an incredibly comprehensive, philosophically grounded vision for change. It really covers all the bases: identity, knowledge, ethics, critical thinking.
It's a demanding framework, for sure.
So, synthesizing all these different threads from the initial definitions through Bodenrin's analysis of philosophical trends to this holistic vision from Badru and Omotoso.
Yeah.
What's the takeaway? What's the path forward for education and emancipation in Africa look like?
Well, the Omotoso paper from 2010, wrapping things up, concludes that, look, Western education isn't going away. Globalization is real. You can't just reject it entirely. But it's an urgent task to elevate indigenous knowledge systems, elevate them such that it competes favorably with any other knowledge system.
So not isolation, but integration from a position of strength and confidence in one's own heritage.
Precisely. And that connects directly to the work of Pascal Mangwini, reviewed by Milliern and Lukin more recently. His work is described as having an emancipative mission.
How so?
His goal is to shape African philosophy on its own terms, free from those dominant Eurocentric lenses we've been talking about. He argues you have to establish an authentic identity and voice first before you can properly engage in intercultural dialogue.
Decolonize the mind first, then talk as equals.
That's the idea, a process of decolonization and self-liberation. He uses potent metaphors like roads must fall, not just literally, but as a call for a revolution against Eurocentric dominance in philosophy departments.
And he sees movements like Black Lives Matter
as vital preconditions for promoting the justice and openness needed for this philosophical shift.
So it's about reclaiming and asserting intellectual space. And does he point to specific African concepts?
Yes, he champions indigenous concepts, things like ujamaa, that idea of familyhood or community.
Which Nair also talked about.
Right. And Ubuntu, that deep sense of interconnectedness, I am because we are. He sees these as distinct principles of Africanness and positions Ubuntu right at the center of the struggle for philosophical emancipation.
Drawing strength, identity, wisdom from within, from genuinely African philosophies.
Exactly. That seems to be the core belief.
So putting it all together, it sounds like the way forward isn't about rejecting everything external. It's more about a critical, self-aware integration built on a really strong foundation of self-knowledge, self-respect.
I think that captures it well. And it brings us back to that powerful quote from Sophie Oluwole referenced in the Omatoso paper.
Remind us.
She said, "Africans today do not know who they are because they never studied nor tried to discover who they were yesterday. However, they have been told they are inferior to whites. Do our youths not deserve to be allowed to find out for themselves who they are?"
That really cuts to the heart of it, doesn't it? The right to self-discovery, free from imposed narratives of inferiority.
Right. It crystallizes the whole thing. The core idea running through all these sources seems to be this: Western knowledge has exposed us to the outside world, but indigenous knowledge will restore to us our inward beauty, identity, and pride.
A balance, an integration.
Right. True emancipation lies in returning to, valuing, and building upon indigenous knowledge, but then meticulously synthesizing it with relevant aspects of Western knowledge, and crucially, as Baudouin stressed,
Through critical evaluation.
always through that rigorous, self-critical, philosophical lens, evaluating tradition, separating the valuable from the perhaps outdated or harmful. That's the essence of building a truly independent, thriving intellectual and societal future for Africa. One built on self-definition, not just reacting to others.
What an incredible journey through this landscape, a really deep dive into that profound link between education, philosophy, and emancipation in an African context. We've covered the history, the challenges, the diverse philosophical responses.
And landed on this idea of a holistic path forward, championing self-awareness, critical thinking, and that thoughtful, critical integration.
You know, it really makes you think. If emancipation isn't just about politics, if it's truly about cognitive liberation,
Freedom of the mind.
right, the power to define your own identity, your own future, free from that intellectual imperialism, then what responsibilities do we all have? Individuals, communities.
Responsibilities for what?
For fostering educational systems that actually lead to this holistic, positive transformation for everyone.
That's a huge question.
It is, and it demands ongoing reflection, ongoing action, not just in Africa, really, but globally, as we all grapple with diverse knowledge systems, with the continuing quest for self-determination everywhere.
Absolutely. A very powerful thought to leave our listeners with. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you.
We look forward to our next exploration with you.